How's it going, everyone? It is Skullzi here with the latest and the greatest gaming news. With 2020 just a couple months away from finally being over, I'd hope that any remaining expectations of Starfield somehow being released in 2020 would basically be gone already as well, as there is like no hope this game is going to come out this year. The only way that would be possible is if Bethesda basically spent like no time marketing this game, or at the very least, they spent a lot less time marketing it when compared to their previous titles. And although Todd Howard did state that he'd prefer waiting until like as close to a game's release date as possible before he actually started to talk about and market a game, at the same time he also said nobody would actually allow him to do that, which is good actually, and I'm sure Microsoft wouldn't be down for that as well. Marketing for a game is a good thing, and that is exactly why Starfield 2020 isn't going to happen. You can bury that dream already if you're still somehow holding on to it. There just isn't enough time in the year to properly market Starfield anymore. So with all that in mind, most people, including myself, have long shifted our release date expectations to November 2021, and the main reason for this date in particular is because it's the most common month that Bethesda Game Studios usually releases their games, and at the same time, it gives ample time between E3 2021 and Starfield's release date, which in this case would be November 2021, with E3 being the most likely event to kick off the real marketing campaign for Starfield. However, there is another release date that a surprisingly large percentage of the Bethesda community believes could be possible, and although it's still in 2021, it's long before November because some people think this game could come out in March of 2021 instead. I've been asked to break down my thoughts on this release date theory numerous times in the past, so I figured I'd finally do that in today's video. First off, Bethesda Game Studios has indeed actually released a game in March before. While their trend is usually sometime around November, The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion actually came out on March 20th, way back in 2006, back when times were much more simpler than now. The Elder Scrolls III Morrowind was released in May as well, and while that obviously is only 2 games out of many, this still highlights that 2 of Bethesda Game Studios' most successful and beloved games were actually released outside of that normal November routine. Also, The Elder Scrolls Blades came out in March, but yeah, most people don't count that one. And another thing to keep in mind here is that both Morrowind and Oblivion were very major and important game releases for Bethesda Game Studios, with Morrowind being a make or break game for Bethesda, meaning if Morrowind didn't sell well, Bethesda could have potentially went bankrupt way back then. And imagine a world without Bethesda Game Studios games. Ew, no. And Oblivion was also an important release date for Bethesda as well, as it was a launch title for the Xbox 360 and basically flagshipped that style of RPG and Bethesda Game Studios games in general to start off that entire generation of gaming. With all this in mind, one might say that Starfield 2 is an important flagship release for Bethesda, as Starfield is not only Bethesda Game Studios' first RPG for the next generation of gaming, but it's also the flagship of the entire Starfield franchise as well, as this would be the very first game and experience everyone will have with the game's universe. So with all that in mind, some people might say because Starfield is definitely a flagship release that it could too potentially be released in March, but that's kind of like a vapid comparison to make. But first impressions do matter for sure, especially when it comes to the introduction of an entire new gaming franchise. So with that in mind, Bethesda Game Studios really needs to do an amazing job with this game, because if it doesn't do well, most people will have a negative perspective on Starfield for quite a long time, and not just as a game, but potentially even as an entire franchise, because if Starfield doesn't do well enough, that would drastically reduce the chances that we would ever see a Starfield 2. Basically, it could kill the franchise right out of the gate. Bethesda Game Studios knows this, and they definitely want to avoid this. However, as far as what my thoughts are on a potential March 2021 Starfield release date, while I do acknowledge it is indeed technically possible, I guess, I still say it's very unlikely, as it's still well before E3 2021, and by skipping out on any potential E3 marketing, Starfield would lose out on a lot of potential hype and exposure. And being the first game in the franchise, Bethesda would want this game to get as much hype as possible and have the best introduction to the gaming community that it could potentially have, and for this reason alone, I believe that is enough to basically quell any potential hopes or speculation of a March 2021 Starfield release date. So don't get your hopes up, like at all. Starfield isn't going to come out anytime before E3 of June 2021, and even if E3 doesn't happen next year or doesn't exist anymore, Bethesda would still throw down on a digital showcase equivalent, one way or another. Plus, there is always QuakeCon, which is well before November as well, as that usually takes place in August. Also, there is a bit of a technical piece of evidence to support my anti-March 2021 belief beliefs as well. If we check the official Starfield trademark documents for the actual game itself, we can determine a bit of a timeline in which we could expect the game to be released. This is something I have broken down in previous videos, so if you're familiar with how all this works, then don't worry, as I'll only briefly summarize it here, really quick, for those who may not already know how all of this works. As you can see, the most recent update to the Starfield trademark is right here at the top of this list. Back on June 15th, the US Patent and Trademark Office issued a second extension to the Starfield trademark, extending the deadline in which Bethesda would have to have Starfield finished and ready for sale. If Bethesda doesn't finish Starfield before the trademark expires, then they would have to pay the fees and go through the entire process of refiling the trademark all over again, which can be quite a lengthy process and could potentially even risk some other company filing a request for a Starfield trademark for their own game or product. That would definitely complicate this process even further, and Bethesda would want to avoid this. And the US Patent and Trademark Office gives companies a 6-month period plus 5 additional 6-month extensions. And as you saw on this list, Bethesda's second extension was used up back in June of this year, meaning if they want to finish this game within the maximum allotted trademark deadline, which of course they would want to for the reasons I just listed earlier, then they would have to finish Starfield within 2 years following June 15th, 2020, as well as have it actually listed for sale at the same time, meaning Bethesda would have to finish and have Starfield listed for sale by June 15th, 2022. So assuming Bethesda would want to use as much of their allotted trademark timeline as possible, November 2021 is still a much more likely release date than March. Even March 2022 is more likely than March 2021, so as you can see based on the legal documents and common trademark procedures, November 2021 is a much more likely release date. This release date would fall towards the later end of that trademark timeline and still allow 6 additional months just in case Bethesda had to delay the game for some unforeseen reason. Allowing an extra buffer of time like this would be a smart move by Bethesda, and with that in mind, it would totally line up with the November 2021 release date. This so happens to be what the majority of the community believes as well, so all of this lines up almost too perfectly. So yeah, that is my response to those March 2021 Starfield release date expectations, and at the same time, hopefully I helped you all see why November 2021 is a much more likely situation, especially when you take those trademark findings into consideration. As always though, what I want to know is, what do you think about all of this? When do you think Starfield will finally come out? Let me know down in the comments below, and if you enjoy the content, be sure to give the video a thumbs up, subscribe, and also hit that bell to turn notifications on. Doing all of this as well as sharing the video helps the channel out a lot more than you may think. If you want to help the channel, those are the best ways on how to do it. And this video was also brought to you by the following amazing people. If you want to get a video shout out like this, you can support the channel over on Ko-fi, Patreon, or here on YouTube as an exclusive channel member. Links for all of these and more are down in the description below. And as always, thank you for watching. Be sure to tune in next time when Cyberpunk 2077 gets delayed again. That Todd Howard Starfield silent treatment do be hitting different right now.
It just works.